Good evening to all. The School of Finance Place Business is very pleased tonight to co-organize with BSB Alumni this masterclass, which honors one brilliant graduate, Sandrine McClure, and is related to a topic that strongly concerns the wine and spirits industry. Sandrine has been developing for many years her professional expertise, in particular in the field of marketing. For a company which is willing to push or lead a brand, in particular a luxury brand, knowledge about consumer behavior, their perceptions, and how to decode and influence them is key. This is also what we're doing with the Wine and Spirits Lab, headed by Professor Nikos Jorgansis at the School of Wine and Spirits Business. I am sure that my colleagues, my students, our alumni will pay particular attention to the insights Sandrine will share with us on the development of iconic products. Indeed, iconicity is probably the second name of the most prestigious wines from Burgundy. Sandrine, thank you again for sharing your inspiring experience and your insights on this topic. Thank you to the colleagues who worked on the organization of this event, and I wish you an excellent masterclass. Thank you.
Thank you, Jérôme. I'll just say one thing before giving the floor over to Sandrine. We're very lucky to have Sandrine today. Sandrine is actually an amazing profile. I spent years and years, and she talked about it, with some of the world-leading advertising agencies and communications agencies, a huge background in strategy as well. She's going to talk today about the 6 pillars of creating an iconic brand. And this is something I myself is very interested in. So this should be a great conference today. So Sandrine, we are very excited to listen to what you have to say today, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you very much for welcoming me, and I'm really sorry I couldn't physically come with you today because I'm based in the UK at the moment. So I'm basically literally in hard lockdown in the UK. My journey, basically my professional journey, dates from almost 30 years ago. So I'm a graduate of BSB in '93, which is extremely painful to think of. It's a long time ago. And I majored in marketing at the time. So I looked at working in marketing. I worked actually for a little while at Kraft, basically Mondelez now, on chocolate at the time. And I quickly realized that's not where my passion was lying. And my passion was very firmly anchored in international work. So I went to do something completely adjacent, which in the end I've never really worked concretely on, which is finance. I added to my degree an MA in international finance to end up in a completely different field of practice, which is insights, cultural insights. So I was lucky enough at the time in the UK to come across an agency that was specialized in helping brands and advertising agencies understand cultural shifts to help them guide, for example, their range extensions or understanding a specific market or a specific target. So I worked on things at the time. The first 10 years of my professional life were around answering questions such as, we own the color red. It's not very difficult to imagine what soft drink that I was working for at the time. We own the color red. What is red across the world in terms of cultural meanings? So basically, I'd pack up my bag and I'd travel across the world and go and meet with cultural curators, sociologists, psychologists, academics, people working in different cultural fields to understand things like what is the meaning of red. Or I worked for quite a long time for Volvo cars, and we worked a lot on what's the meaning of safety and what does safety mean to different age cohorts. And all of that basically led me, let's typical funnel process to specialize more and more into brands that were strong exports in France. So very quickly, if you start thinking about the types of brands in France that export, you're very quickly on, well, wine and spirit, but fashion also, beauty, cars and cheese. Cars never really did it for me, not very culturally consonant with me. Cheese, very briefly, very interesting stuff to talk about when you talk about cheese, but very quickly I specialized in basically two areas, wine and spirits, and on brands such as Dior or Chanel, working on cosmetics and perfume. Perfume, many parallels with wine and spirits. You're talking about alcohol you wear rather than alcohol you drink, but in the end, it's actually not that different in many ways. And I basically worked increasingly on helping my clients understand how to tap into luxury buyers and growing luxury cohorts. Throughout that time, I climbed the corporate ladder within the organization I was working at. So that's WPP, which is the biggest communications group in the world. And I, for a few years, I was heading the consultancy department of Kantar in France. At the same time, because I developed a strong expertise in luxury and Chanel was one of my clients, I was asked to be global CEO of the media and advertising agency looking after Chanel at WPP. So for 2 years, I overlooked 35 markets of basically executives looking exclusively after Chanel. Unfortunately, so I had two jobs, one at Kantar, which was part of WPP, one at media agency called Mindshare, also WPP. Unfortunately, Kantar was sold by WPP, and I had to make basically life-changing decisions with regards to where I was going, and that coincided with COVID a year ago, and I decided to take a breather. So for the past year, I've basically been working for myself. So I've started my own agency. What it's allowed me to do is to reconnect with my most historical clients. And really, I've got a portfolio of 3 main clients, all French, all massively international, which are still Chanel, still Essilor, which I don't know if you know them, but they make #1 in the world for lenses and glasses. And the third one is Moët Hennessy. So I'm in no means a wine and spirits expert in the product sense, but I've been working now for many alcohol brands for about 25 years, helping them basically refine their brand strategies and understand how to seek growth in new markets. So either seeking growth in new places in the world or seeking growth basically amongst people that they haven't tapped into so far. So I've been working for Pernod Ricard, MMPJ, especially as a luxury specialist. I've worked for Beringer Blas, Constellations, Diageo, many groups basically in the past. But again, in all humility, because I am not a wine and spirit specialist. What we're going to talk about today, I'm going to share with you a presentation about what makes a brand iconic. And I'm going to share my screen now with you and explain to you why, and of course, document is not showing, just give me a sec. Why I think brand and iconicity are extremely important. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
I'll put it on full. Yeah, that's it.
Perfect.
So first of all, the reason we're going to talk about iconicity is because iconicity is the holy grail of branding. You know you've got a very strong brand if it reaches an iconic status. And why do you want your brand to be strong? Because branding is not just fun. Branding is financially viable. And the thing that is very important to bear in mind, especially when you deal in a world like the world of wine and spirits, where a lot of people, let's face it, don't really know the product sufficiently for it to be self-sufficient. It's very important for it to be branded. It's very important to look at brands because it's the starting point of what's going to make basically what's going to add value in terms of shareholder return, but also what's going to ensure you can future-proof your company. No brand, no future. Let's just make a quick parallel through the world of luxury, fashion, and beauty. Today, I made a note of that because I thought it was interesting. Today, I was reading BOF, which is Business of Fashion, which is the ultimate publisher, basically news publishers on what's happening in the world of luxury and fashion. And they were commenting on the fact that Gucci basically was the brand that had achieved the most in terms of luxury in the past 5 years. And they were saying, and I just made a couple notes, that they made the most spectacular turnaround in the history of modern luxury. They multiplied the financial contribution to Kering by almost 3 times just before 2014 and 2019. And that's something that no brand ever succeeds. They now reach sales worth 4 billion euros, and that's the figure for 2019. If you purely look at the brand and you look at what Interbrand published about the Gucci brand in 2019, you could actually have anticipated this contribution to the financial value. So if you look at the chart here, you can see that some brands are doing well. Louis Vuitton plus 14% in terms of the contribution to the financial value of Louis Vuitton by the brand, plus 11% at Chanel as well. But Gucci success story is aligned with the fact that you've got an increase of value of the brand Gucci in 2019 versus 2018 of plus 23%. All these elements, all the points, if you're not convinced that brand is important, all these points indicate that nurturing the brand is adding value to a company. So now I've made my point about why branding is not just a nice to have, but it's an absolute must have. I'm going to talk to you about iconicity. And I'm going to talk to you about why iconicity is very important and how to nurture iconicity for any brand. Iconicity has always been there. It's always been in history. There's always been, if you look at times, and you can, for example, rewind to the origins of religion as we understand it in the Western world, there's always been basically 2 camps, people who are pro icons and people that are against icons. Because if you look at the semantic, what being iconic is about, it's about giving meaning to the world and helping people navigate the world. And that's what branding is about as well. Sharp branding, clever branding will help people make decisions when they're looking at several products that they can't experience, but they have to decide which one they're going to invest their money into. So iconicity has always been there. It's a means to navigate the world. We've had unforgettable branding forever. We've had unforgettable branding applied to many categories, and we know that basically it transcends history and it transcends categories. And you see every single time I'll take an example which is anchored in history, anchored in business, big business in general, outside wine and spirit category, and one within the wine and spirit category, and I hope you will recognize all of them because they're all supposed, in my mind, they're all very iconic of their own category. They've all got temples of worship. So unforgettable branding comes to life in very specific places. They come to life with regards to religion in churches and cathedrals, Apple stores for Apple. And here I picked, because I had Dom Pérignon and the Dom Pérignon shield earlier on, I picked Auvilliers, the Abbaye d'Auvilliers. They also all come with the rituals. If you're iconic, people understand how to behave around you. And they understand that you have a form of behavior as well. And if this picture doesn't evoke to you what it should, you're not in the right place in Dijon. They've all got Messiah as well. So they all have somebody who's been talking the good words, who's been storytelling about the icon in question. So Steve Jobs here, or here we've got Judy Cavill at Crook, for example. And they've got clearly identified brands. They have a following. They have people that we call also amis de la maison in many places, or ambassadors, who talk and buy into the ethos of what the iconic brand is about. And lastly, and quite importantly as well, because I strongly believe you can't be iconic without a personality, and a personality has to be strong. And if personality is strong, a personality is not consensual. So you've got enemies here in the case of religion, enemies here in the case of Apple with Bill Gates, and enemies with regards to alcohol as well. Here I took actually a historical, it's quite sweet if you look at it later, about why you should not drink alcohol. That's from the 18th century. But actually we could have gone back to Bill Gates, who in 2018, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation published a very interesting study as to why drinking is detrimental, and it ended up being published in The Lancet, which is the ultimate publication with regards to health matters. So when you're iconic, you do tend to have enemies, but that's fine. It's part of the game. So how do you know whether you have an iconic product? And this tends to be based around 6 pillars, that 6 requirements, 6 attributes, and 6 behaviors that are followed by all iconic brands. We're going to start with the first one, which is actually a very interesting one to emulate in wine and spirits. It's the one of heritage. Let's take 4 examples here. Outside the category of wine and spirits, you've got here 4 brands that definitely are part of ultimate iconic brands. So you've got Cartier Love, you've got the Coca-Cola, the classic, you've got the Polo for Lacoste, and the Stan Smith for Adidas. What do all these iconic brands, Adidas, Coca-Cola, Cartier, and Lacoste have? They have an original product. They have a product that actually encapsulates, encompasses all the elements that exemplify their excellence. So they've got 4 here, we've got 4 original products, and each one of these products has got a history behind it. The history of the chemist and his formula for Coca-Cola and Formula X, the history of the tennis players, the history of what Cartier Love is about. And I don't know if you know the whole symbol about what a Cartier Love bracelet is about, but it's basically, it's a shackle. So you get it locked once and you can't unlock it. When you give a love bracelet, it's forever. But what it allows them, the fact of having an original product, is to have a basis, a strong foundation from which to unfold and to develop from. So when Coca-Cola is given license to do signature mixers, or Stan Smith to have Kermit the Frog on it, it's all the acceptability of the fact that they've stretched themselves and they've diversified is only lent by the fact that they've got a very long history that they respect in the products that they develop. It's something, one of the brands that I find interesting for that, the first one that came to my mind when I was preparing the charts in the wine and spirits industry, and there are many examples, but one that I find extremely interesting is the one of Veuve Clicquot. So Veuve Clicquot, it's in the name, is about a woman who runs a business, basically. And when you look at a lot of the activations that Veuve Clicquot implements, they have this common thread that can become very contemporary and very consonant with our culture, but that don't forget the heritage of Veuve Clicquot. So, for example, when La Grande Dame gets Yayoi Kusama to redesign the packaging, they're asking a woman to do it. When they develop philanthropy programs like they do with the Women Award or all the business mentoring programs that they sponsor, it's relevant and it's legitimate because it's anchored in the heritage of Madame Clicquot-Ponsardin being a businesswoman at the time, leading basically a champagne house. So the first pillar, which is heritage, is about never forgetting where you come from. Where you come from, actually, in wine and spirits can be can go back to two things. It can be about the story, but also never forgetting, I think it's very powerful when you look at the iconicity of brands, never forgetting how precious the basic ingredients, the raw materials, where the product comes from in the first place. And that is something I'm sure you're convinced of already. So all stories, all brand developments and activations basically will remain legitimate and will build your iconicity if they remain consistent with the brand and where it comes from. But keeping it updated and modern is the holy grail, and that's the difficult tension basically to activate, is remaining truthful to the heritage but consonant and modern. So that's the first pillar. Second one is design. Design is in a way the easiest one, because when we think iconicity, we think of how it manifests in terms of visual signs. So thinking of the semiotic of an iconic brand is quite spontaneous. And what we see is that iconic brands are the ones that can be recognized instantly beyond their logo. They've got a whole grammar of visual signs that actually can contribute to recognition without having to be all played together at the same time. So here I just picked 3 bottle shapes, which very clearly, you might need to be French for that one, but very clearly and quickly indicates that I'm talking about 3 different brands here, which are Orangina, Perrier, and Coca-Cola. Would have been way too easy to put three bottles of wine from different regions here. So it's about having shapes, and it's about having a discourse, a language, a visual language that you can then play with. Something that Chanel is excellent at. They have claimed and owned different elements of the visual language that allow them to venture into new areas legitimately. So the camellia, which you find, for example, on in its most basic form, you find it as a sticker on the back of Chanel when you buy a Chanel gift. But you will find also as being a whole high jewelry collection. And the high jewelry collection, not branded, it doesn't say Chanel anywhere. Anybody will know is a Chanel collection because you've got a camellia on it. Same thing for the handbag, the quilting on the handbag, which you will find on makeup, for example, and would instantly cue that it's within the Chanel realm of iconicity. Tweed is another one. Tweed, which has been used, for example, on the bracelets of some watches, which instantly cue their Chanel watches, not because they're branded Chanel, but because you recognize the tweed. So it's about developing a very unique visual language. And I'm sticking with visual language because there's also, for certain brands, the fact of developing a very specific semantic, but we won't go into that at the moment. We'll stick with the visual signs. Visual signs that allow Apple, even though the products are not that superior, to actually stand out, and allow many brands to be recognized even when they're not saying who they are. So the examples I've got here are the red tab for Levi's. You'll notice here it doesn't even say Levi's anymore. Or here, the wave from Coca-Cola, which instantly says Coca-Cola even though there is no other branding. Or the swoosh by Nike, which is one of the most famous ones. Or just for Perrier Jouet, the fact of using the Japanese anemone is part of the visual language. And instantly, if you see a Japanese anemone, you know that you're talking about Perrier Jouet. So that's the second pillar, design, which is about how the brand expresses itself visually. But it also needs to express itself behaviorally, and it needs to express itself in a way that will leave a strong memory imprint. And one of the ways we know of leaving a memory imprint to be remembered is to create memories and souvenirs. And the best way to create memories is to make people live the experience, because we know that living is loving, especially in the wine and spirits industry. So experience, one of the best examples of a brand which is basically colorful cubes of plastic. One of the best examples of a brand that has been able, standing truthful to its core, which is basically championing creativity, which has been able to expand in so many ways, but keeping its iconicity, is Lego. And having an experience in the Lego store is, for me, quite painful personally, but it's incredible when you start looking at how they basically champion everywhere in the store the fact that they're here to champion creativity. Another example, which is very interesting and also goes back to playing with your heritage, is what Louis Vuitton does with many of its activities. Louis Vuitton, you might, if you close your eyes and you see Louis Vuitton, you might be visualizing a monogram bag. But the monogram bag originally is all about travel, because their original business was trunks, basically trunks for travelers. And they've kept the root in exploration and traveling very, very strong. So they still do luggage, but they've now translated it to be way more accessible and way more modern through the city guides, for example, and through the city guides actually that have gone digital as well. So they've got the city guide app. But what's really interesting is how consistently they have taken their heritage, the legacy in travel, and made it totally experiential by creating the foundation. There's nothing more experiential than visiting a museum. You don't leave with one of the artifacts. So very, very experiential. But maybe you might not know that, but if you look at the shape of the foundation, it's actually supposed to be a sailboat with all its sails inflated, so taking the wind. And if it's been designed to show a sailboat, it's because, again, Louis Vuitton is replaying their heritage and the iconic anchorage they've got into traveling. Uber Eats is another interesting example of stretching, basically being iconic as a brand and being able to stretch and diversify, because they stay with the roots of their iconicity, which in their case is convenience, basically making people's life easier. One of the examples here that always makes me smile, well, we've got the Christmas trees, Uber delivering and picking up your Christmas trees if you want to, but also they did at one stage, they did kittens on demand, which, well, for me, opens a Pandora's box with regards to moral issues behind it. But they wanted to make people's lives better. And at one stage in the States, you could actually borrow a kitten for home. Experience, again, for wine and spirits is a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer if you can bring people to the birthplace of your brand, but sometimes you just have to recreate an experience elsewhere and to own your experience. It's actually quite complicated to own a wine and spirit experience because a lot of the time, and that's one of the big paradoxes of wine and spirits, is you're there to be especially for on-trade, you're in a place where you've got no control whatsoever with regards to the environment you're in. And when you're actually off trade as well, the amount of control you've got on what people do with your product on retail is very, very little. So recreating an experience and a place where people can live to love your brand is very, very important. And that's something that Johnny Walker, for example, embarked on. I think the most significant first development was the creation of the Johnny Walker House in Singapore. But since then, they've flourished. And the most significant one now is going to be the opening of the one in Edinburgh, where they've taken over the very iconic in itself, actually, Fraser building where they're going to be able to offer basically a point of view on what the experience of the brand should be about. So it's about education, clearly, but it's also about an experience that will leave a memorial imprint. And where am I stuck? Okay, good. The next pillar is transcending function. An iconic brand is not stuck in its product. When we think of Coca-Cola, we think, of course, of the thirst-quenching, refreshing soda. But what they actually stand for and what they teach people they're about, if you join Coca-Cola, you're not there as a thirst quencher. You're there to basically promote human happiness. And their human happiness, the way they activate it basically across the globe, is by talking about sharing, about ownership. They have been doing that since the inception almost of Coca-Cola. And there's the famous story of them bringing Santa and making Santa red. But anyway, which is very iconic. If a brand can make Santa red, they're an iconic brand. Because in case you didn't know, Santa was green before Coca-Cola decided it was red. Evian, very interesting example as well about transcending function. They don't talk about the fact that they're water. They don't talk about the fact that they are pure and thirst quenching. And what they talk about is the fact that basically rehydration keeps you young. So it's live young is what they talk about. And they talk about behaviors and an attitude to life that transcend their function, which is to rehydrate. And one of my favorite, the most obvious for me example of wine and spirit brand that actually transcends its function and has been able to tap into really high human truth that doesn't age and will never age because by definition it is progressive, is Johnny Walker. When Johnny Walker challenges keep walking, Johnny Walker says, we're going to evolve, we're going to help you evolve, and we're going to evolve with the times. And that's, for me, one of the ultimate future-proofed brand proposition ever available. So if you're an iconic brand, what you can do is elevate yourself beyond your functional benefit. Not being afraid to aim high. I think when Johnny Walker, if you actually decompose it, keep walking, it's like such a massive human truth and a massive higher level call to action. It's very brave to say keep walking and to own it. But also bear in mind that even though you mustn't be afraid to aim high, a brand is only a facilitator. A brand is only there to make people feel and do something. So the consumer remains the hero. You're just helping them along the path. My fifth sort of behavioral rule for an iconic brand is culture. If you're iconic, you shape culture, you inspire culture. So inspiring culture, for example, I think one of the very obvious examples is Warhol, when Warhol was reworking brands as simple as tomato soup or Campbell's soup or Heinz tomato ketchup. Normal brands, everyday brands were inspiring to him. I couldn't resist putting these two here, still on Coca-Cola, because they're the Daft Punk edition of Coca-Cola, highly relevant given the current announcement. And this one is an interesting one because it's within the category. It's Jeff Koons who developed a Venus as a cradle for Dom Pérignon a few years ago. And I don't want to be quoting on that because I'm not sure, but I think 15 were produced. And it became very iconic basically for Dom Pérignon because basically the whole Jeff Koons was inspired to adapt his Venus, because he already had a Venus, to adapt his Venus to actually be a cradle for a brand that he considered to be iconic. And that's a typical example of when a brand is sufficiently iconic that it inspires artists. And it works the other way around as well. So iconic brands understand culture. They shape culture, but also they replay culture. And I could have used two examples here. I put Oreo, they're quite interesting because all these different examples show them tapping into different cultural moments and spirits. But one which is a lot simpler and very interesting to look at is Skittles. Skittles, the little sweets, basically multicolored sweets, known for the colorful mix of sweets and candy in the pack. What Skittles is also known for is because Skittles is all about the rainbow. So candies of different colors that champion the rainbow. And every year during LGBTQ week, they actually pull away from the rainbow and they say they sell white Skittles because they want the rainbow to be owned by LGBTQ culture and not by them for a specific moment in time. And that's a very interesting way of being respectful to culture, because culture is very prickly. Culture is very evolving by nature and can make people quite defensive and quite aggressive when it's not dealt with sensibly and with sensitivity. And an example, a very recent example, is the the Louis Vuitton scandal around the Jamaican jumper. And it's a really, really silly example, and there's no judgment coming from me towards Louis Vuitton whatsoever. But what happened is they had a whole Jamaican collection and they messed up on the jumper the colors of the flag. So they use red, which is not on the Jamaican flag. And it's really silly, but nowadays you can't mess this sort of things up, because with social media especially, news travel too fast and you're way too quickly trolled at best, ghosted at worst. Cultural influence and cultural understanding are essential, but cultural reappropriation, if it's not done properly, is extremely dangerous. Also, brands that shape culture can champion a specific lifestyle. So you don't want to be everything to all people, because then you don't have a personality anymore. And I said earlier on, iconic brands are not consensual. They've got a strong character, they've got a strong personality. So here we've got the example of Harley Davidson, which is very much into this is the lifestyle of a Harley Davidson type of guy, take it or leave it. And that's very powerful. And I could, in a more diluted way, possibly in the alcohol world, I could have put Jack Daniels there, but it's way more diluted. So culture is my fifth pillar. Yes, participate in culture, but do it properly. Do it with humility and with integrity. Collaborating with artists is always a quick fix, a quick winner, if you're doing it properly as well. And it allows to be part of the social dialogue, which ultimately, when you're wine and spirits and you are anyway to be part of conversations, is what you want to be part of, the social dialogue, and tap into a specific lifestyle. The example I've got here, which is, I think, very sweet because it's very humble, there's a lot of humility and integrity to it, is Coca-Cola, who I said earlier on stands for happiness. When Denmark was voted the happiest country in the world, they actually, in airports, they put in the arrivals, welcome to the happiest country in the world. And what you could see was a zoom from what looked like the Danish flag all the way to the Coca-Cola logo. How clever is that? It's not cultural reappropriation. It's basically championing another culture in a very sensible way. And the last of my six pillars is community. Iconic brands foster community spirit. I think Apple, again, is the most obvious example of a community spirit. People define themselves as being an Apple or an Android type person. They define themselves as being pro or against the captive Apple culture, basically the fact that when you're in Apple on all your devices. And we saw that when Steve Jobs died, basically some people literally had basically lost somebody from their own family, they felt. Community is very well fostered as well by Lego, who just basically gives the brand to their fans and lets the fans do whatever they want with Lego. So they create their own fan events, they create their own rallies. Lego doesn't even partake. It's not part. They let people do whatever they want with their brand because they're so self-confident about how strong the brand is. And just for fun here, it's something that we've seen again and again and again. And if that's not community appropriation, tattoos, they stay for life. And if you start Googling tattoos of bras armés, for example, for NC, you'll be surprised how many people have had the bras armés tattooed. basically it's about letting fans express their love freely. It's about being opening to their ideas, and it's about talking to them, but not talking down at them. It's about talking to them, but in a two-way relationship and not in a down-way relationship. So that's it basically for my little chat about iconicity and the behavior of iconic brands. So if we sum up, they have a strong heritage, they're true to it, and they use it to evolve and progress. They have a strong language in terms of what they look like, but also the way that they speak. A strong semantic language can be very important. They provide very strong experiences because that's how you remember them and they become part of your life. They transcend function, which allows them to diversify. They shape culture, but they're also inspired by culture, and they foster communities. And that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Sandrine, for this intervention. I don't know if you can hear me.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we're good. Okay. We will then open the floor to questions after this very, very interesting presentation. Any questions in this room, or I will relay some questions from outside? Yes, Steven.
So I had a question about, there's a lot of, in today's environment, a lot of people are looking back on either action or inaction that companies or individuals have done in the past and bringing that to life now and criticizing it. Is that happening frequently with iconic brands? And if it does happen, do they tend to be more on the defensive side and kind of own it, saying that was the time that we were in and it was appropriate at that time, or are they trying to get ahead of it and fix it and apologize and whatnot?
It's a very multi-layered question you're asking.
Yes.
What comes to my mind instantly are like cultural appropriation scandals or Alexander Wang and the whole sex scandals. There's different things here. There's where history was in the past. So I'm going to take an example. I'm trying. Okay, champagne brand, one of the top most distributed French champagne brands, has got a red sash on their name. Do you know the red sash on its name?
I have no idea, no.
Because originally it's a German name, and came a time where it's better to hide it a bit if you wanted people to keep on consuming because of the anti-German sentiment. That's anchored in their history. They don't advertise it, but not apologetic about it. It did happen. It's part of history, and you can't do anything about it. What would be wrong is to say, no, it never happened. So you can't deny when you've misbehaved as a brand. You can't deny, I'm trying to find concrete examples, but you can't deny polluting rivers if you're in fashion for years with dyes, because potentially you didn't know any better. So I think the worst thing one can do is deny something that is true. It's, if you actually, in a way, you're lucky enough to have a history and to have done something about it, be proud about it because you've corrected it. Mm-hmm. But the whole idea of behavior, people expect brands to be impeccable with regards to how they behave. And if they're not impeccable, to correct it and to be working on it. So completely different example in a very weird world. I work on bricks, okay, for making houses. Bricks basically make big holes in the ground because they go and get the clay from the ground. That's what they're made of. What's interesting is not the fact that they dig holes. Everybody could criticize them for it. It's what they do with that afterwards. And basically the whole industry is working on developing biodiversity. Once they've finished the exploitation, it's about refilling with water, making laths and recreating biodiversity where it's been lost. So I would say, yeah, a lot of brands, especially the older they are, the more likely they are to have skeletons in their closets. Mm-hmm. But as long as you've done something about it, I think people will value you more for your corrective actions than they will actually for a brand that's never had any hiccup.
Great.
But that's quite personal perspective.
Sure, makes sense. Thanks.
We have a number of questions from also the audience outside this room. We won't be able to cover all of them probably, otherwise we keep you until midnight, Sandrine. I'm not sure that's okay. Although
stop making sense after a certain time.
It will be only 11 p.m. your time.
True. It's still be today.
We had a question about the communication about very actual current subjects, such as Black Lives Matters, sustainability, very current subject that brands seems to jump on as if they need to because of the pressure. How do iconic brand manage that? Really, is it do they manage it well? Could you comment on that?
Well. Okay, my first one is going to be on CSR. We're lucky enough, I think, in wine and spirits for a huge majority of the industry to actually be able to control our value chain quite carefully. So the fact of not being too CSR compliant is quite unacceptable because responsible employment, well, I would bloody well hope so. Treating the ground properly, again, I would hope so. The value chain is a reasonably simple value chain compared to many industries. So I think there's very little margin for error. And people do take for, but at the same time, where the industry is quite lucky is, especially if you look at the more prestige premium end of the market, people quite take for granted that the job is done properly. So people don't expect from a wine and spirit brand to have to justify itself to the same extent as a car manufacturer might do. Because if you're a car manufacturer, you need to explain more thoroughly what you're made of, where you're made, by whom, or a sneaker manufacturer, by whom, and from what materials. We're talking here about an industry that actually has got no excuse to really mess up, but people take for granted that things are done in a reasonably good way. And also because the whole industry is the bottom line, the need state that's attached to the category is a need state of enjoyment. It's actually less necessary, again, to be very, it's not the first layer of claim that people expect. It's not the first thing that makes them connect. That's not the first thing that they go to a wine and spirit brand for it to be worthy. Because if you're too worthy, you become boring. Wine and spirit should never be boring. So that would be my take on this one.
Okay, thanks, Sandrine. Another question from the audience. How can big brands that might be iconic, let's say Dolce & Gabbana, can make such big mistakes, especially in China, and they're not the only one. We covered this in class, so we're asking this.
Talked about the Spaghetti Gate.
Yeah, the Spaghetti Gate, and before that, the other blunders that were made. There were a few, 2 or 3 of them in China.
Dolce & Gabbana are very, very opinionated.
Yes.
As a brand.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they don't do research before launching a new advertising campaign in China.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think they shouldn't, because I think one of the most important things, if you're a brand that's driven by creativity, is to trust your guts on many things, and you need to be ahead of what people need and not ask them what they need, because you never be ahead. So I think having creative courage and audacity is absolutely essential. I think where they've been, I think the problem is when you fall into arrogance. So that's what I was saying about being in culture, shape culture, but don't do it with arrogance. And I think that's why people don't forgive you, is when you come across as arrogant. And there is a lot of proper luxury brands, true luxury brands are authoritative. They're audacious, they're daring, they're authoritative. But as soon as they become too arrogant, I think that's where they tip on the other side and they actually create too much distance and lose desire. So I would say the Spaghetti Gate was a proper form of arrogance, I think, and of being blinkered and yeah, not seeking advice. But I would love to know what you guys, especially you Chinese guys, think about what I just said. But Spaghetti Gate was very interesting.
Yeah, before that, the ad campaign itself was bashed also in China, and then other brands have done mistakes as well. Would you recommend for an iconic brand? Do they need the 6 pillars, or would that work with 3 pillars?
Oh,
or 2 pillars.
I would say you're a strong brand. The more pillars you have, the stronger your brand. But you're not iconic until you've got them all. Because can you be, maybe I would, okay, experience I would delist slightly, but you can't be iconic if you've not built your heritage. So your heritage can be 2 years old, doesn't matter. Tesla's got a heritage, it's got a story, it's got a proper storytelling, it's got roots, it's anchored in something. So heritage doesn't mean you need to be 2 centuries old, but you need to have foundations that give you legitimacy to stretch, to develop, to expand, and to storytell. I think design is absolutely essential. If you don't have strong codes, you're not recognizable. And if you're not recognizable, again, the problem. The biggest strength of an iconic brand is it allows you to diversify and to evolve with the times. And to be able to do that whilst remaining recognizable, you need to have this visual language. You need to have your storytelling and your original storytelling. You need to, transcending function is a bit harder. That would be a consequence possibly of being iconic. You need to be in culture. That's unavoidable. And then you can create experiences that also create communities. But I think it's difficult to be a long-lasting, future-proofed iconic brand without all 6.
Okay, thanks, Sandrine. Regarding design is a very important part of an iconic brand. A question from the audience. What comes into the design? How many cues do you need to have for an iconic brand to be where it should be? Do they make a huge difference with design, and how do they do better than the other ones?
So you can develop new codes in design. Your design language is not something that's fixated at one moment in time. It's something that you can evolve. So by explaining to people why each is part of your design language. So I'm going to go back to Chanel, for example. The magnolia is maybe not in the original design language. It was part of the history because it was Mademoiselle's favorite flower, but it wasn't part of the design vocabulary. It wasn't one of the signs, potentially. Black and white was more likely to be one of the signs. So you can evolve your grammar. It's in grammaire visuelle. You can evolve your lexicon, but there will only be legitimacy to what you put in lexicon if it's got a reason for being there. So if it's a signifier of something else. So the camellia signifies Mademoiselle's favorite flower. Tweed signifies the fact that Mademoiselle used to hunt in Scotland and used to borrow hunting jackets from the men there. I could go on forever. Jersey, she was the first to use jersey in female fashion. jersey stems from the fact that she borrowed it from the fishermen in Deauville to make comfortable clothes for women. So everything has got a reason. The chain on the handbag goes back to the story, which is she had a chain at the bottom of every single jacket or skirt, so that when the body turned, the jacket or the skirt will stay in the same place. So everything that is a part of your lexicon has got a meaning behind it.
Okay.
It can't be gratuitous or frivolous. It's anchored in your heritage and your history.
For a good reason.
Yeah.
Thank you. A question regarding COVID. With the situation of COVID, brands, how do they maintain their iconicity when you can't have much experiential things happening or events, when you cannot experience spirits in the bars, the top cocktail bars? Well, actually you can in Shanghai, but not in France or places in the US. So I guess you go online. What do you do?
Well, you could counter argue that people have never had as much time to be online and to have digital explorations into your world. So you can argue that people have actually never taken the time as much when they feel a connection with the brand to actually follow the thread and to go onto potentially brand websites or to look at different products. And also, we're not seeing a like-for-like in terms of volume shift of on-trade to off-trade, but possibly when you're on-trade for a lot of experiences in, let's say, trendy spirits, for example, to what extent are you genuinely connecting with the brand of vodka you're drinking? Because you've got the neons and the nightclub and you're completely distracted, you're in a social moment that's really high energy. Whilst potentially if you're at home, you've got this one-on-one connection through a screen, but you've got this one-on-one connection with the brand. So I would say it's just you have to use different ways of connecting with people, but it's not because people are deprived of on-trade that they don't have strong connections with brands at home. What we hear a lot is actually people have curated their home life and premiumized it a lot. So we know that investments in new furniture has gone up. We know that people have done work onto their houses. And what we're seeing is a lot of people are premiumizing their consumption in home because also they're thinking, I don't have the markup of on-trade, so I'm going to actually indulge. I'm going to make an oversimplification, but I'm a 12-year drinker. I'm going to actually upgrade to a 25-year because you know what, if I was having it on trade, it would cost me so much more anyway. So I think the picture is a lot more blurred than that.
Okay. Stephen?
Is there a particular brand that you've seen or noticed maneuver through the pandemic the best, or kind of started in one position and come out kind of on top, set themselves aside or apart?
I've seen brands mess up very early on, being a bit too keen. So, for example, Brewdog were very criticized. So at the very start of the pandemic, everybody jumped on the bandwagon of making hand gel. Very easy when you're in alcohol anyway, or if you make perfumes, especially, to actually divert your production and to make hand gels with it. LVMH did it with elegance. They did it very well. Everybody was not as elegant as them, and Brewdog was not as elegant as them. So they reduced the production of beer, they shifted to producing hand gels, but they made it in such a garish and they lost integrity. They did it, they were trying to do something very generous, but they did it in a very self-centered way. And people got a bit confused as to what the intention was. So that's an example of bad things I've seen happening in COVID. Brands that try to do things for their own interest. And something a bit lateral, but that is a brand as well, is influencers. An influencer is a brand. And if you look at Instagram, especially influencers, some of them signed their own death as a brand by forgetting to shift into a more generous and mindful position. So I can't remember her name, but there was a typical example of this really highly followed American socialite who basically was able to get a COVID test way before anybody could get them in the States. I think she paid $3,000 for a test, moved to her house in the Hamptons, took the nanny with her, was seen testing positive with COVID, but she was still kissing her kids. Her whole life was plastered as being amazing in the Hamptons. And everybody's in lockdown, not breathing in New York, basically. And all brands dropped her, basically. She lost all her sponsored engagements and her image really, really suffered. And I think the brands, I don't have any concrete brands because brands captured quite elegantly what the spirit needed to be about. But I think brands that behave in a crisis, seeking their own interest, were the ones that actually lost out.
And do you think those brands are ones that had kind of crisis management consultants, or do you think that it was just kind of the wits of the brand itself and, you know, they're prepared for maybe not something like this, but, you know, a crisis in general?
Well, I would hope that common sense and humanity would allow people to behave properly without the help of crisis consultants.
Sure. You'd like to hope that, yes.
You want to hope that. And if you've got to call your crisis consultant guy, a lot of people didn't do their job before.
Sure.
So some crisis, you know, can't be averted. But it was all about common sense and being sympathetic to a situation. It wasn't rocket science.
You talked, Sandrine, a lot about culture as one of the pillars as well. What about the relationship between iconic brands and subcultures? Are they waiting until the thing becomes mainstream or semi-mainstream, or are they also digging in subculture? What's your take on this?
I think there's a bit of everything, to be honest with you. Brands that create cultures and brands that follow them. Trying to think, you know, I don't know if you take, it's because they've been in the news very recently for obvious reasons, but if you take Ace of Spades, have they followed culture or have they created it? I would say they followed it, but in a way and with an endorsement, a human endorsement behind it that's so legitimate in its own culture that it's not cultural appropriation. It just makes sense. Trying to think. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, Jack.
Yes, you are. Yeah.
I think there are brands that create cultures. There are brands that are very, very clever. You don't see them, but just tapping into cultures. So one of my favorite examples was Kettle One. Was it in the 90s in the States? They basically jumped, martini was the thing. And they jumped onto basically making the sexy martini a dirty martini. And all they did to be referenced, to be in people's bars, was to say, we'll give you these kick-ass olives that come from the Netherlands. I think there was a whole story around the olives. They didn't talk about how amazing Kettle One was. They talked about the fact that they would give you these amazing olives that would allow you to have the best dirty martini possible because you had these olives. And people were asking for Kettle One just to get the olives. That, for me, is one of these simple cultural smartness that somebody had this most amazing idea at one stage. It's super easy to implement. That, for me, is about creating a culture in a very sensible way and one that actually makes sense with who you are as a brand. So that's one of my favorite sort of smart stories ever.
It's a good one. Another question regarding service versus physical brands. Is it more difficult for a service-oriented brand like Uber to become iconic rather than a physical brand like a cognac or fashion brand? Or does that not make sense as a question?
I don't know. I think the bottom line is, what role are people allowing you to play in their life? And how much space are they happy to give you in their life, and with what depth of significance? So becoming iconic is only possible, and that's going back to my transcending function. Becoming iconic is only possible if you take a legitimate space that is emotionally very resonant. So you can be something that happens very infrequently, but when it happens, it's super special. Or you can be something that has a very strong emotional resonance as a daily usage, but just because the service you provide is so unavoidable. I think the spectrum is very, very wide. And do you need to be a product brand or an experiential brand? I think any product brand should be an experiential brand anyway. And if you're an experiential brand, you commoditize something. So bottom line, you are a product, even if you're not a material product. So yeah, sorry, a bit twisted.
I mean, in a sense, Uber is also a service. They don't own any cars, they just provide the service itself.
It is a service. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Additional questions in the room? Yes.
I have a question. I was going back to what you said at the beginning about Gucci compared to other luxury brands doing so well. I was interested in knowing what they've done different from the other brands to do so well, and maybe how it fits in also into your 6 pillars. Like, yeah, it would be interesting to have more about that.
Yeah, Gucci is... The big question about Gucci is whether they're going to be able to sustain. There's sprinters and there's marathon runners, and they've been sprinters, and you can't run a marathon at the speed of a sprint. And they have been super brave, basically. They've done the shopping experience differently, the collections, they've done, in a way, their codes, their design codes, for example, they've broken everything by saying, what we're going to be about is constant evolution and constant change. So they've created and engaged communities in a much faster and way more engaging way than comparative brands, because the other brands were marathon runners. So they haven't told new stories with the same pace, the same renewal pace. They've not kept people on their toes to the same extent, but they are marathon runners, and time might prove them right to have remained coherent and consistent. And, you know, it's the turtle and the hare story. And the turtle might be proven right in the long run. Gucci has done amazingly, but is it going to finish the race? That's a big question. But they've renewed the story all the time, so people have been basically kept alert all the time, and it's a difficult posture and attitude to have in the long term.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've just a question. Do I think it's more dangerous?
No, it's an easy
for a
question,
marathon?
kind of.
Well, it depends what heart condition you've got. I would say, if you want to be a trendy spirit brand, run a sprint. If you want to be a long-lasting prestige cognac or a champagne, go for the marathon. Again, depends on what serves your purpose. Both make sense for different people, but I would think if you've got integrity and history, it's a shame to potentially burn yourself through a sprint.
Maybe an additional question. We'll wrap up quite soon because we have 3 more minutes to go probably. Do you think iconic brands take good advantage of the e-commerce channels, or do they understand them and use them to their advantage more than others?
There's no blanket answer to that. And I really don't want to have to answer the question actually in a way, because if you look at Hermès, for example, super iconic brand, there was a stage where everybody in the luxury world was looking at the Hermès website going, oh my God, they're so clever. They can afford not to invest in it. And everybody's going, oh my God, it is so 1990s. How clever of them. That's the ultimate luxury, is not to need to do it. Well, since they've moved on a lot. But recent example, Bottega Veneta, which at the moment in fashion is coined by a lot of people as being potentially the next Gucci, actually, with a complete revival and doing very interesting things. They've withdrawn from all social media.
Wow.
And it's gutsy, it's brave, it's audacious, and that could really pay off for them, because if they're brave enough to do that, they've got a self-confidence which is very endearing. So I can't really answer that, because sometimes not being good at certain things, if it's lived as being an active choice, can actually say a lot with regards to a brand integrity or a brand choice with regards to how it wants to behave, especially in the luxury world.
It's very interesting what you're saying, Sandrine, because we had a few questions about online and e-commerce and so on. And for an iconic brand to decide not to be on social media anymore, which is quite avant-garde, maybe, or maybe not, but it's a strong choice. Is quite interesting when so much is going on social networks, especially now.
Yeah, especially with social commerce. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we already at 115 minutes, so we're gonna wrap up now. Sandrine, I really want to thank you for the time you made in your agenda for us and the audience. That's a bit more than 100 people listening to us out there from the school and outside the school as well. So. Thank you very much. We hope to taste a nice iconic brand here on those premises when you come to Dijon at the School of Wine and Spirits Business. I am talking under the control of Jérôme, who owns the keys for the wine cellar, but I'm sure we could pop up a nice bottle with you. Yes, he's saying thank you, and yes, right, Jérôme. Putting you on
yes, I'm back. Of course. Thank you very much, Sandrine. It was very, very impressive, and the question for the art was my question.
So thank you very much, Sandrine. It was fantastic to have you, and once again, hope to have you live here when you stop by in the area. Maybe working for some iconic brands around here. We have a few in the vineyards, and all the best to you. Be safe, and thanks for spending once again time with our students and alumni.
My pleasure. It's been a pleasure. Have
Take
a lovely
care. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.